Topical. It's just about it's as if it's as if it's about your life. You know.
How come none of my friends ever have a dungeon? Instead, they all just have rape dungeons.
Bob Saget died today.
Ragged. Come on, man. Show some respect.
I didn't realize he was a dirty comedian until way later. I just thought he was Full House dad.
You have a dirty mind, you know. Well, you do. He does. I'm not.
I mean, when we were kids, it was definitely Full House. I mean, he was it Danny Tanner? Was that
Danny
his name?
Tanner.
Like that was that's what we knew him from, and then like definitely America's Funniest Home Videos too. I mean, that was like I used to love watching that show. I mean,
If I was the neighbor of the Full House house, I would have my questions as to what the hell's going on in that house.
Yeah, especially when it came back 20 years later in Fuller House.
But San Francisco is pretty progressive. 3 men living in a house. It's a good city for it.
That's true.
It's from my inside sources that Bob Saget actually was murdered by Ashley Olsen.
No, he didn't get that from anyone, folks. That is false.
I'm gonna go with fake news. Fake news.
You be careful, Sean, because you're going to be meeting Bob Saget if you're not careful.
That clip's gonna come up at the trial, I think.
Yeah.
My like child custody. It's like
child custody / murder suicide.
He's a monster, Your Honor. Bob Saget has died. It wasn't so long ago that we mourned the death of Norm Macdonald. These are kind of like two Pete's of a sort of 90s pod.
Well, you yourself made the reference that it's almost like an old couple and one of them dying and the other one following soon after, you know? Like it does kind of feel like that. Like it's strange that they have died so close to one another. But unfortunately it's worked out that way.
And again, it was Mary Kate and Ashley Wilson who did murder. I understand that there is actually a live feed right now. We can go live. We have the Take-Two Plus chopper. We see that the Bronco is traveling quite fast on the highway. What do we remember Bob Saget for exactly, Tyler?
First and foremost, got to be Full House. And also America's Funniest Home Videos on there at the same time. It was pretty
Full
crazy.
House came out before America's Funniest.
Yeah, but they were on air like at the same time at one point.
Yeah.
And really the biggest shows on television probably at the time.
Just FYI, he got paid a shit ton of money to be on Full House. I guess like it wasn't really his type of comedy because he was certainly like a dirty comedian.
Would he have been the Masked for a show like that, like the one popular person?
I think they built it around him.
Generally, especially, I mean, around that time it was really starting where like sitcoms were built around comedians, like stand-up comedians, and Danny would, and like Bob would have been the guy who would have like anchored that show. Yeah, it's like Tyler was saying, like his stand-up comedy is kind of the antithesis of what this character is. So the fact that they chose to build his character up as this very wholesome, like
because
family
that's what he
man.
looks like, though. He just has the look.
Yeah, I guess there's
which makes his comedy so shocking because it's like such a foul mouth for such a pretty city boy mouth.
I feel like he did after Full House like hit the adult humor even harder to try to get away from that Danny Tanner persona a little bit.
I mean, I first noticed that with like the Aristocrats, that documentary about the Aristocrats joke.
It's the most foul joke ever concocted with permutations based on the comedian who tells it. It was notorious that Bob Saget had the most foul of interpretations of this joke, and it was documented in The Aristocrats.
They literally just talked to a ton of different comedians and got their interpretation of the joke, and so
how it had evolved over time.
And the history of it.
That too.
Yeah. And so Bob tells it, and it's like Bob's telling of it is very like scatological. Like it's just full of shit. Like he's just constantly talking about how people are shitting everywhere.
So what happens next? Let's see. They've had a lot of sex. The room's covered in feces. The mother had a big boil on her back. That popped.
It's a really extreme version of the joke, and when I watched that for the first time, I couldn't believe that it was like Danny Tanner or like the guy from Funniest Home Videos like telling this joke. And then I started to realize, oh wait, he actually has like this, completely different side to him that's probably more like who he is in real life than the character you think he was, like in the 90s,
It would be pretty hilarious if you were like a big fan of Full House and America's Funniest Home Videos, and you bought tickets like for you and the family to go see Bob Saget back in the day, and like walked into the most foul-mouthed, disgusting stand-up routine for an hour.
He also had a pretty good run with How I Met Your Mother, really, because he's the narrator for that,
Yeah, I
series.
never understood that. Like, he did a good job, but like
Well,
he was supposed to be like 10 years older than the guy playing him. Someday his voice is going to turn into Bob Saget in the next decade, which I guess means he's not going to be on How I Met Your Father coming in 2022.
No, it's a completely different cast from what I understand.
Dirty Work.
That's his first movie directed, yeah.
Yeah, and not a great movie that when we talked about it, but
yeah, it was all right. It had potential, but it was
what?
butchered in the editing process.
Okay, let's look at it. Right, you watch it when it first comes out. It's like it's not great. Then Chris Farley dies, and then you see it, and you're like, oh, you know what? It's actually pretty good. And then Norm Macdonald dies, and you're like, you know what? Actually, it's pretty good. And then freaking Bob Saget dies, and you're like,
this is a masterpiece.
This is the greatest movie I've ever seen in my entire life.
It's like a omen, like a lot of fucking people are dead that were on this movie. Bob's gone, Norm's gone, Jack Warden's gone, Don Rickles gone, Artie Lang. It can't be long for Artie Lang. I love it. But,
physically gone.
Chevy Chase is up there. Like it's
yeah.
This is like a hit list.
Anyways, rip Bob and rip whoever the fuck else is going to die next. Thank you for listening, and God bless us all.
Hey, that's pretty good.
Kind of like Cirque du Soleil, but more like Jerk du Soleil.